go about using that level to jump off and make it a better, more equal world in that sense? Or is that even something that's possible?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So one thing I always say, I mean, artificial intelligence has many definitions. And the way I define it is that it's a replication of natural intelligence. So it's a replication of us, our brain. If you study the technicality of it, it's all about how do we replicate how the brain learns. And if it learns the same way that we do, and to your point, from the same data that we do, then it will pick up on our biases. I even read an article about the fact that AI picks up on our superstitions as well. So it can be superstitious algorithm. So if you're not careful about how we're teaching it, and again, not invest enough time upfront researching those unintended consequences, then AI does what we do, probably worse and probably faster. And so to your point, yeah, it will exactly highlight. How do we address it? Well, that's $1 million question. So I think one of the ways, and I don't think there's a silver bullet to that, but I think one of the ways is to make sure that the team that developed this artificial intelligence for any purpose are a diverse team. So that you have, entry points or feedback from different people with different backgrounds. And by diversity, I don't mean just gender diversity, but that's also part of it. I also mean cultural diversity and age and generation diversity. I also mean talent diversity, ability, disability diversity, every single bit that makes us different as human beings. So I think by bringing that into the back-end development of AI, at least we can, to a degree, address some of these, bias issues. And then, of course, test the test data that you use is quite important. But that's kind of one way of addressing it. I'm sure there's many more ways and that can work with this.
That's really interesting. I've got another question here for you. At times, we do not realize what softwares that we are using, the services which are recommended, or the road that we've been suggested, they are all powered by AI. Has AI become more ubiquitous in our day-to-day lives, or it's different? Is that what we think it is?
Is AI? Sorry, what? I missed what part of the question.
Has AI become more ubiquitous in our day-to-day lives?
Okay.
My pronunciation is more. It's just become a very big part, I think, ubiquitous.
Yeah. Ubiquitous. Yes. So I think, we use AI a lot more than we realize that we do. So, and one thing that for me was very interesting when I studied, the history of artificial intelligence is that it's not actually a new technology. The term AI has been coined for, more than 60 plus years ago. I think it was 1958, 6. And some of these concepts that we learn in AI date back to even before the time that the term itself was actually coined. So it's not a new tech. And so it's not surprising that, that's something that has existed for a very long time. It's also integrated into different software and different applications that we use on a day-to-day basis. And that can be anything from, obviously our smartphones and tablets, but also, could some of the appliances or, our banking system, our transportation system, you name it. I don't think there is any industry out there that hasn't, in one way or the other, used an AI-enabled application. So yeah, I would say it's not new, it's not coming, it's already here, and it's old. The only thing that I think has created this hype around AI is that it's only in, I would say, recent decade, I would say, in the last decade or a little bit maybe before that they've realize how to commercialize it and how to make money out of it and how to scale it and how to actually make it work, because AI in its history has had two what we call as AI winters, which means because it couldn't deliver on the promises that it made, the funding out of the R&D and therefore the commercialization of it was pulled, and so the research in it became a lot less. But as the computational power improved, and we started doing more with AI, and we started proving that it can do a lot more, then we started learning how to make money out of it, how to automate things, how to get rid of tasks that we don't like, how to increase productivity, reduce costs, and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's why all of a sudden there was this, oh my God, it's going to change the world. And I think it will, because it touches a lot of things.
Yeah, you answered my second question. I was going to ask you, how come it become such a buzz? Because if it was there since like a long time ago, why in recent years we've been hearing a lot about it? They were investing a lot through AI, and you're seeing lots of application and lots of platforms are using AI in a broader scope. Do you think that we really need to be very careful with what's going on with this technology, or what is your thought on that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I am an ethics enthusiast. So for a second, I was going to say ethicist, but I won't dare say that. I think we need to be very careful with anything that moves this quickly. The pace of change that AI is bringing into our world is significantly higher than the previous technologies that we've had. And I think if you're not careful, then we will see history repeat itself with a new technology, but just at a bigger scale and probably a more devastating scale. Doesn't mean it's all bad, and doesn't mean that we have to stop it, but it does mean that we have to spend a little bit more time up front to think about, but why are we building a platform or an application, and then how can it possibly go wrong? There's no problem in asking those questions up front. And then how can we prevent that? You go and buy a drug from a drugstore, and you see the side effects. You can see the possible side effects. Doesn't mean the pharmaceutical is going to stop producing that drug. It just means that you as the user make an informed decision to a degree that, hey, if I see these side effects, one, I'm aware that I might experience them, and two, if I do, then I should stop using it. So kind of like with the same concept, bringing the same concept into the world of AI, we can do, a lot of upfront research in terms of, making sure that we are moving in the right direction, putting the right restrictions in place.
So it's not just about all go AI, all using AI platforms. It's just about to answer the why, and why we are going toward that path, and if AI actually solve a problem.
Yeah, exactly. And then to my previous point, when you have a diverse team of developers, a team that have had experience, different experiences than that of the actual core developing team, those are the people that can tell you how a particular technology that you're using, or how the way you're using it, the way you're collecting data, could possibly harm some others. I was having a chat with someone last week. I won't mention the name of the company. It's an amazing company though, just because I haven't had permission from them to. But this guy mentioned to me that they were working on this application that they wanted to develop, and they needed some data, and they thought, well, if you go to some countries and we pay people to collect data, then it could be good, because they get something out of it, and we tell them why we're collecting data, and then we educate them as to what we're doing with the data. And then someone was like, who was from that region that this person or this team wanted to collect data from, was like, actually no, because in that region the head of the family could actually force everyone else to go and give their data, even if they don't want to, just because they want to get the money. So it's not just the end game always that can be unethical or misused. It's the journey as well. And I think spending that time to understand, different consequences of what you're doing is very, very important.
And I guess it's kind of related on that trend, a little bit different, but I'm a very big supporter and a fan of kind of the low code applications that are being built, like the whole democratization of AI. I just think it's great, but obviously it does come with that whole great power, great responsibility, especially in that sense, right? So, I mean, it's a case of what I'm asking for is more almost tangible things for the citizen data scientists out in the world to kind of look out for. Like, these are people who don't necessarily have a tech background, can use the devices in front of them and get an answer out there, but how do they make sure that what they're doing isn't really biased or is ethical in that sense? If there's like one or two kind of takeaway points that they can keep in mind as they build out their own solutions.
Yeah, I think educating yourself is very, very key. And the amount of information available on the internet for free and simple to understand is so much that I don't think we have the excuse not to use them or not to know. So I know for a fact, coming from Microsoft, that Microsoft have a responsible AI guidelines available on their website. So whether you are building your application on a Microsoft platform or not, it's always good to go and read those guidelines. It doesn't take very long. They're not like, pages and pages of, legal documentations that, I think sometimes when we say ethics and then lawyers get involved, and that's sometimes what people think, or it's something that's going to slow down my work, but it's actually not. So just spend some time up front. I'm sure Google has some ethical guidelines, and some of these big companies, they have spent a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of resources to actually research what these guidelines look like. So go and educate yourself on that before you step into, dive into development. It's good, it's great, because it's exciting. When you have an idea, all you want to see is it's coming to life. But I think we are getting to the point where everyone needs to keep in mind that this baby that's coming into this world, what is it going to do? What is it going to achieve? And how do I make sure that, as someone who is the developer of this application, that I show my responsibility, that I cover my blind spots? So educating yourself is key.
That's very interesting. I have another question on this one. So does the danger of AI mean that we have to stop investing in this technology, or this is what the job of AI ethics is, or it's a scary and gray area? So
yes, that's a good question. So no, it doesn't. So one of the things is that I've recently come across, and as someone who was so focused on the negative and how could things go wrong for so long, I was like, well, so what do we do, kind of thing. The reality is bad ethics can also be unethical in itself. And by that, I mean, if you think too much about the negative side of things and you stop the development of something that could potentially be good for the society, that in itself is unethical. So ethics is good to a degree, to kind of make sure that you do things for the right reason. But for example, if I have, an application of some sort that can diagnose cancer at a higher, more accurate rate, and for whatever reason I figure out that it could be misused in other ways, I think what I could do is, as someone who's responsible for developing that I do the research in terms of the customers that use this, put my terms and conditions in place, and say that, you're not allowed to use it for X, Y, and Z, or only partner with the companies that I know use these technologies in an ethical way. But if I completely stop that and don't put it outside, then by not doing that, I am causing harm for the society. So sure. No, absolutely not. The job of ethics isn't to stop things, isn't even, sometimes it might slow things down, but I don't think that's a bad thing all the time. Hope that answers the question.
It does. So you did actually. So it's just to make sure that we are on the right track and we are improving by doing that initial assessment and investment to make sure that we are ethical in the path that we are on. Interesting. Exactly. Thank you.
That's okay.
I guess, God, there's just so many different parts of it that relate into it, right? And it's kind of like one of those things of, where do you draw the line? So there's all these things that happen, right? We've seen I think, was it Uber or Google, one of their companies that were trying the autonomous vehicle driving, that a van ran into someone and killed just a pedestrian. Or every single day, like I think it was the Tom Cruise deep fake the other day that popped up that looked unbelievably real. Like where is the line where, yes, autonomous vehicles would be great and it would be so much more helpful. Where do we draw the line with these kind of things? Like how do the ethics come into play with there?
Yeah, those are really interesting questions. And the thing that I like about ethics is that every time you dive into it, you end up with more questions than you end up with answers. So I don't think I have the answer for your question in general. I think for every application, it's on a case-by-case basis, country by country basis, maybe industry vertical by industry vertical basis. So with regards to the driverless cars, I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of people in terms of what do they think the ethical implications of, being killed by a person versus being killed by a car is. And I've got some really interesting answers. I remember asking, we were talking about, this whole dilemma of the driverless cars ethics and the trolley problem. I can dive into that if you want to. And I asked one of my colleagues, and I was like, so what do you do? If you were to, so the trolley problem, for those who don't know, it's, if there's a, say for example, you're in a car and there's a bunch of kids on the side of the road. If you don't steer away, you kill them, and if you do, then you kill yourself or someone else. Then how do you make that decision? There's like ton different versions of that as well. So then I put the question to the person asking me this. And so what do you do? And someone who was walking past was like, oh, it depends on my insurance policy. So that to me was like, it's an accountability question. As someone who, is driving, some people probably care more about the accountability side than the actual ethical side, because none of these decisions are right and none of them are completely wrong either. So, but what the most interesting talk that I've had about the trolley problem is with a guy called Mahmoud Hikmet, who is the CIO of Omeo, a company in New Zealand that's actually building these driverless cars. I do encourage everyone to go and watch his YouTube video that he's made about this trolley problem. The ethical dilemma that he says the actual trolley problem question is that if you are the decision maker here and someone tells you, if you press a button and all the cars tomorrow on the road become driverless cars and you have a lot less accidents during the year, but of the accidents that do happen, they're all caused by machines. But if you don't press that and we stay the same, then a lot more people will die every year. But everyone who's dead or injured has another person on the other side of it to blame for. So I think that's the actual ethical dilemma here. To what do you then decide? Do you go, okay, less people at risk, but machines kill them, or more people at risk, but I've got someone to hold to account? So a lot of these things come to the whole accountability thing. It's if someone lost a dear one to an accident, will they want to see another person be punished for that wrongdoing, or would they want to see a car getting 1,000 negative points, or some kind of financial incentive from the company? It's so there's no right or wrong. There's no simple answer to that.
Yeah.
And everyone's going to answer that differently.
No, and I'm so exactly. And I mean, that was kind of where I was getting to a little bit as well. I'm so glad you brought that up, where people kind of think of technology as this thing that's going to unify the whole world. It's going to make globalization so much easier because everything will apply the same everywhere. But it really is not the case with AI, because every place has their own traditions, and the cultures have such a key part in how ethics are perceived, right? I mean, every single person will have a different point of view on their own personal ethics than the person beside them. Even if they've grown up in the exact same lives, everyone is so different that I think people at times kind of forget that part of ethics, where even the answer to it is going to have to be very personalized.
Yes. And I think the other very important thing is whatever we define today is going to set up the foundation of ethics for the future generations. So they're going to be brought up into this world accepting that this is how things are. Unlikely that they would challenge it as well. I mean, how many times do we challenge the whole Industrial Revolution and that we're sitting at our desks and not bringing water from the well, but as a result, yes, our brains are probably smarter, but our bodies are kind of getting weaker, and we're getting I don't know, more diabetes and more heart disease and all that kind of stuff. So we don't really, because that's how we're born with this. So that's all we know. So the future generations, that's all they're going to know. So whatever we put in place today is going to set those foundations for future generations as well. So that's why I think it's quite to answer your other application, deep fake one, it's interesting. Personally, I never get the why behind why someone came up with that. I would love to know if someone who's listening knows why this came about and what was the idea behind it. I do know that Microsoft has released a just before the US election, the last US election in 2020, they released a way of detecting those deepfake videos. So it was kind of like already like an antivirus was already produced. But yes, that's, I think, in my perspective, that's where you definitely draw the line.
That's interesting. So we need to maybe prevent for the deep fake, or maybe to make it more identifiable, we need to make it like a bad solution, or do something to be able to identify or distinguish between the human voice and the robot voice, and somehow make it noticeable as a solution, or maybe like, I don't know, provide a bad AI solution to have that fault in it, so at least you can understand between if it's real or if it's not. But as you mentioned, Microsoft has proposed a new solution, so I guess they're trying to draw that line and make sure that it doesn't do harm.
Yeah, I think kind of like a static version of that, and I'm not saying it was bad, but Photoshop was pretty much the same thing for photos, right? You can take anyone's photo and make it look like whatever it is that you want, and it's not just about putting people in places that they've never been. It's about making people look like what they don't look like in the real world, and therefore create this, with the models and the fashion industries. What I'm talking about is everyone now aspires to have flawless skin and like amazing body, whereas the model who's actually posing there probably doesn't even have what you're seeing on that picture. But you have people going to all this extent to make themselves look like that. So I think at some point, maybe, I don't know, it will be good for people to actually identify these deep fake videos with just bare eyes. Like, we know what's Photoshop, what's not, most of the times.
Is that just the evolution of our own brains at that stage of, well, this is normality, I've just decided to now like see what I see. So it's interesting.
I think, I know, and it depends. Like, if you know the person and you hear something from them, you're like, well, no, that's out of character, it can't be that person, or this person is, I don't know, passed away X many years ago and this video was just created yesterday. So different ways. But I think there's definitely, we need a software to identify it.
It's very interesting and kind of scary, I guess, because AI is such a powerful thing that we have out there, and everybody can use it in their own way, right? So it makes it a bit more dangerous, I guess. How can we make sure that, because as a developer, for example, you make sure that you deliver a good software, you deliver a good product, make sure that you follow all the policies, all the ethics. But there are people out there that can abuse the system. How we can have something in place to make sure that we have a good AI solution out there, or if there are other people's like making or hacking things up, cannot use AI, the power of AI to do something else. I know we cannot like prevent it 100%, but is there anything that you can suggest or recommend that help people who are out there to maybe consider it?
Yeah, I think, look, as long as people exist, there's always good intentions, bad intentions. And as long as, when there's a will, there's a way, positive or negative. And I think with AI ethics, just like most other industries, I see four key pillars playing a role in making sure that it's used in the right way. One is governments need to definitely step up their game, be a little bit quicker in term and more proactive with regards to setting up legislations, and whether even if every country is different, that's fine, but at least have some guidelines, have some legislations, have some illegal use of AI that is defined in place and everyone knows about it. And the other one is the companies and the investors who actually invest into anything for development. Ask that question from your partners, from your developer, from your people, from your researcher. The developers definitely, at the end of the day, those are the ones who are actually developing this tech together, know the ins and outs of it. So maybe think a little bit outside the box, think a little bit outside of your vision, and think, well, if there was another developer as smart as you are on the other side and wanted to misuse this, then how could they? And then what can you do, or what can you suggest to others? It may not be you as a developer, but how can you suggest to the company to prevent that? And last but not the least, or even most important, is the users. And that's where the whole education piece comes along. So I founded this company called Comfort.ai last year, dedicated to making artificial intelligence everyone's comfort zone. And all I do through that company is educate people, by just understanding what this technology is. Not only the fear of this, AI goes away, but also they start asking questions as to this thing that I'm using, is it developed by an ethical source, an ethical company? Because every single source of data that I give them and every dollar is basically a vote that I want you to exist. So start asking that questions. And if users don't use AI, then AI is not useful because it needs data. So I think those 4 pillars are quite key. And then bad guys always exist. So it's going to be an ongoing battle.
I love that.
Interesting one.
I'm going to use gender neutral. Sorry, not guys, bad people.
Yeah, no, I've started saying folks to everything, and it just sounds like I'm saying fairies and folktales for absolutely everything now, how I refer to people, but it's just become my thing. Like, folks, this is it.
Yes, folks, yes.
Exactly. But I mean, to kind of wrap up everything you mentioned, I just, in my own head, trying to keep everything straight. I'm like, all the tips and tricks, I guess, making sure we've got diverse teams to actually make sure all different viewpoints are considered and looked at. Oh, so many stories about how things have gone wrong because they just didn't know to look out for something because they've never experienced that themselves. Making sure you've actually read up on things and actually understand the different parts of it. And you've already mentioned just there the 4 different pillars. But I guess for maybe just the developers themselves, or whether that's a citizen data scientist out there, where can they go and find these? I know you mentioned bits here and there about responsible AI that Microsoft's put out, a few things on Google. Is there something that you have found has been super helpful when you were kind of getting up the skill with everything around it? That just 1 or 2 kind of links, or we can share them later if you'd like.
I can send you some links in terms of, some kind of good places, guidelines that I have seen. But the reality is, when I did my research, I was actually quite shocked by lack of ethical resources out there. And I think that's one thing, that's one of the pillars of danger that I pointed out in my thesis. Since then, things have progressed a little bit, maybe not as much as they should. But I know IEEE now has an ethical kind of pillar, AAAI. These are like well-known journals in the world. So academia is kind of focusing on it a little bit more, but industry is still so far behind. No, I won't say there's like one place. It all depends on what is it you're trying to do. But just know this, that whatever project you're working on, you are unlikely to be the first person that has worked on it. So a simple, Google or Bing search is not going to take long for you to read about, other people's experiences. And you might come across other things, not just the unethical, but things that have gone wrong in other projects that you can now prevent and succeed this time. So, I would say do your research, please.
I think that's a fabulous note to wrap this up on, in fairness. I think it just wraps everything up really, really well, unless Somi had any other questions.
No, I have too many, but it doesn't. We need another session to go through it.
I feel like that happens
It's-
after every single time we do this. I don't know if you felt the same way. I'm just like,
Yeah.
I feel like leave with like, can we keep talking for about another 3 hours? It'll just keep going.
yeah, especially with ethics, it's kind of like, oh, that's
very
interesting.
broad
So what
topic
about that?
and interesting. Yeah.
It's just one rabbit hole to another, and it's just you keep spiraling. It's great. Like it's always just fabulous conversations. But look, we might actually wrap it up in that sense. And I'm sure any materials we can find, we'll share those all on our socials. Saba, thank you so much for your time. We really do appreciate it. And I know it's a little bit later in New Zealand, so thank you so much.
Thanks for joining.
No problem. For anyone on the podcasts listening, feel free to reach out to me if you want to have any further conversations. Always happy to. And
we can obviously definitely back that up because she was happy to talk to us, right? So I mean, we'll share all the socials. Really easily findable. And with that, we might say goodbye for tonight. And our next podcast will be at the end of April, and it'll be about AI in IoT. So look forward to that. And until then, this is it.
Thank you. Thanks again, Saba.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Bye.